Hello, and welcome to our final version of our game, Arcane Redemption. From the main menu, you can do things like view our controls, but mainly you're gonna want to just hit play, which takes you to our introductory cutscene. Once the mayor has filled you in on the story of your protagonist, the character you play as, you are free to explore the jail cell that you've found yourself in. If you break this barrel, you can grab a health potion that you could see from your cell from when you spawned, and the sign tells you how to open up your inventory there. Our player here didn't do it, but yeah. Now they know how. These signs in town tell the player how they can interact with their environment in certain ways. And this NPC here guides the player to their first step, which is to enter the fire dungeon so that they can get the fire ruby to cast fire spells and wield their first element as a wizard. Here is our first main area of the game where the player is introduced to the combat mechanics with their sword. This is the fire dungeon. They're created by some plant golems who they must fight through. You can see there above their heads that we have a diegetic health indicator through the leaves on the characters' bodies that disintegrate as they take damage. As they interact with the sign here, they can see that it tells the player that they can press 1 to use a health potion, which they did there. They grabbed a key, which makes the keyhole on the door light up and let them enter here. A lot more enemies to get through, so we can just skip through this. Once those enemies are defeated, our player here loots some barrels, but you can hear in the background there a door had opened, and you can see that the next passage has revealed itself. Once they enter here, they have found the fire gem that they are after, but when they pick it up, the door behind them closes. And they can see ahead that there's a vine wall that blocks the way, but a mural tells them that they can press Q to swing, which lets them use their fire staff and new fire gem to burn through the vines. The next mural tells them that they can hold right click to scope in on enemies using our diegetic scope. The center of the orb acts as a reticle, an aimed down sights, if you will, that lets the player scope in on where they want to shoot. Once they cross, they see the mana potion equivalent of the sign that they saw earlier, telling them that they can drink mana potions to refill their mana bar, which is the blue on the top left there, which is consumed every time they cast a fireball spell. Now that everything is cleared, they can leave the fire dungeon and return back to the town, but they can hear that things aren't going so well there. We have an NPC here outside the town that introduces our first boss, the tree boss. The Flandrik, the Pinecone Protector. You can see there that our player is familiarizing themselves with the dodge ability and its momentary invulnerability that it gives. The tree boss has a couple of movesets. It shoots projectiles, and if the player gets too close, it does that mean crown slam attack that you can see there. The player's keeping their distance, so it's not quite damaging them, but if they were to get hit, it does quite a bit. Once they've taken a bunch of damage, they reach their second stage, in which they chase down the player a lot more aggressively and focus on that high damage melee attack. But our player is quite good and saved up a lot of mana potions, so there they are. Once the boss is defeated, we are greeted with a ghost NPC of one of the protagonist's former allies that has possessed the body of our first boss there. You can see now that the tree boss has been defeated, all of life has been restored to the world. What was desert earlier is now lush and green again, as we have our whole game world change with the narrative and the player's progression. Have a choice there with a fold back narrative, so mix of branch and fold back. They have two options. You can see there they could either go to the plant labyrinth or the water trials, and you can see that they've chosen the water trials first, but eventually they'll have to do both. The water trials is our more obstacle course parkour focused environment with, as you can see, still quite a few enemies to keep the player busy. You can see that when the player falls into the water, they actually drown into it. And here are a closer look at our new fire enemies. You can see that, like our plant enemies, they have details on their heads, but now instead of leaves, they're spikes. And these spikes are removed as they take damage to show their health over time. That little mural there, sorry I'm a little slow here, but that mural shows off the element hierarchy, and it basically lets the player know that they can't use their fire staff spells against fire enemies because you can't quite fight fire with fire. They grab the key there and are opening up this door here. I'm facing off against one more flying plant enemy, which are affected by their fire attacks because fire burns plant. So here is the second gem that the player is after. This is the Water Sapphire. When they do this time, instead of a mural showing Q to swap weapons, since they already have the staff equipped, they can now swap elements. And you can see there that they changed from fire to water with the staff equipped. And they were able to douse the flames there and clear the path for themselves. Here they are doing it again to this firewall from a distance as they parkour over to the exit. Once they leave the water dungeon, now instead of appearing back in town, they are on the outside of town, leading into the volcano, which is where they need to head next to restore the element of fire to the world, as the mayor in town explained earlier. And here it is, Mount Fwoosh. Here the players are introduced to a new flying enemy, essentially the same as the plant enemies that they saw in the water dungeon earlier, but these enemies are now affected by the water projectile instead of the fire one that they had earlier. So now the player has to keep track of which elements they have equipped and swap between them. And you can see the need to swap between them now, because they were using water to fight those fire enemies, but now they must switch to fire again to burn through these vines. And to claim these potions here as this optional nook. You can see that after every group of enemies is defeated, a bridge reveals itself, moving out of the lava to continue the player progression. Players found a key there, and burning the vine walls ahead, they can bring it over to this exit door here. Or rather, entrance, should I say. Because they're not quite leaving the volcano yet. They have yet to restore the element of fire. To do that, they must face our game's second tier boss. As they enter, their entrance gets crushed by a rock from the ceiling, and they're introduced to Vaxel, our snail from hell. Immediately, Vaxel starts shooting these fire ring attacks on the floor, and you can hear that there's a metal clang sound when they hit them, and it seems like those attacks aren't doing anything. But you could see just there that, hinted by the opening cutscene, if they actually, instead of trying to attack Vaxel directly, if they shoot the spikes on the roof, those can actually drop down on him. And you can see that the boss's shell starts to crumble. And you can see that they must really manage looking up and shooting the spikes down at the enemy to deal damage, as well as keeping an eye on the ground to avoid getting burnt. You can see that was the last blow, with 3 spikes crushing Vaxel's shell. They are now in the second phase, which shoots homing projectiles quite aggressively, so the player has to keep dodging to avoid getting hit with fatal blows. And you can see they must use the water staff to attack, because Vaxel, being a fire type, is immune to fire attacks. Here we are introduced to the second spirit that has possessed a main god, one of our protagonist Medusa's former friends, now has their soul freed from their living prison. And with that, the exit out of the fire dungeon has properly revealed itself. You can see that now they haven't spawned just outside of town or within, but rather just outside the gates in a hidden path, and the mayor is outside waiting for them. And you can see that he explains that fire has been restored to the realm, and you can see all the torches around the town are lit, which they were not before. He essentially quickly tells the player that thanking them for returning the element of fire, and that the town can now be warm once again, while telling the player that their next move should be to enter the plant dungeon to get the plant gem to begin their journey to restore the element of water to the world. You can see there that the plant dungeon is, well, not seen it yet, but the plant dungeon is our maze component. It's actually called the plant Labyrinth. And here the player has to involve some thinking and puzzle solving skills. You can see here to attack the slime with a water attack as well as a fire attack, and neither work because neither water nor fire can damage water. Reiterating that key. It was clear in the law. You can see on the left there, the player hasn't looked at it, but there is that natural order of the elements displayed once more, just to reiterate those ideas that there is a reason why you cannot attack the water enemies with your water or fire staffs. The player can hit the flowers to toggle which vines are showing. You can see them begin to navigate through the maze by toggling the vines on and off. You can see there the vines to the left block their way. They can toggle closing the path that they came from, but revealing the door that they had a key for. You can see there's a bit of a plant bridge over a moat. Once they cross, they find the next gem, the plant emerald. Once they obtain that, they can now swap to the element of plant. And this diagram shows what they were trying to interact with earlier. They had tried to shoot the water orb from the tree stump earlier, but it was to no avail because they were casting fire and water spells at it, but it doesn't quite do anything. But just now, after retrieving the plant emerald, they understand now that the plant emerald is used with the water orb to grow a plant bridge, which you will see again now. So as you can see, they hit the water orb, it turns into a tree, and reveals a plant bridge ahead of them. Now with the plant engine complete, they can proceed. Once again, they must swap to the plant staff so that they can conjure a bridge to cross the moat there. Walking through this waterfall to enter the bay. Swoosh Bay is what we call it. The home of the element of water. And you can see that these cast points of plant bridges becomes a key factor in this region specifically. You can see many more of the slime enemies. I hadn't explained it earlier, but the slime enemies also have a diegetic health display, this time in the form of bubbles within their body. The flying enemies all have the same health display, which is a second pair of wings, and you can see there that was the bomber enemy, which they're little water droplets that hang from propellers, and when shot down they explode over other enemies, if shot over other enemies. But when the player gets too close, those bombers chase the player down and drop on them, dealing quite a bit of damage. So the player has navigated through the bay, cast some bridges, and collected the key to exit. You can see that was the water variant of the flying enemy. Now, the flying enemies, I hadn't explained it sooner, but they actually have two stages. One is when they're flying and one when they're grounded, sort of like the flying Koopa enemies from Mario. Once they are grounded, they can still move around, hovering over the ground and dealing damage to the player from the ground. Here's the next boss, Skogmast, which is a giant slime squid. It sits in the center of a whirlpool, and you can see there that there's platforms that circle him. Just then the player got hit by one of the bomber enemies from above. They didn't dodge them in time. And you can see that from that attack earlier that they deal quite a bit of damage. So you can see that Skogmast has a couple of attacks. Just there he summoned a tentacle to swing onto the platform and hit the player. And earlier they were shooting projectiles. There's also a sucking attack where Skogmast inhales and breathes in the air and pulls the player off of the platform. Just then he was defeated, and we meet the last ghost NPC. Similarly, guiding the player and warning them of the monster that Skar, their old friend, old mentor, I should say, has become. With the boss defeated, the player can ride the moving platforms to the exit there. Unless they've fallen like they did just now. Here they are, doing one last bridge cast before exiting the bay area. You can see there that they've awoken in a new cave, one that was also tucked away off the beaten trail. And once again, the mayor is outside the town gates waiting for them. But this time you can see that water has actually been restored to the main area. It's shown in a few ways, mainly this river that now flows beneath the bridge that we've been crossing since the start of the game, but there is also a well in town among other small details. The mayor tells the player that now that they've retrieved all three elements and restored all three elements to the world, retrieved all three gems and restored all three elements to the world, they're ready to face Skar. Although that the main goal was to return the elements to the world, there can't be peace as long as Skar, the one who hoarded them all, still around. So here is the player entering the tower, and you can see that as they move up, torches light. And there's an ominous droning to build some tension. Moving up the tower. But once they reach the top, it's empty. Until, during a cutscene, Skar reveals himself in a flash of lightning. We gave him a unique typing effect, inspired by a glitch actually that occurred. But this typing effect is to show that Skar has become something else, not quite human. This dialogue explains the history of the antagonist and the protagonist a bit more. Filling the player in on some of their shared history to show why this conflict is so important. So you can see as soon as the fight begins, the elements on Skar's back has changed color to green. This is to show his current mental state. So as you can see there, it's switched to red and shot a fire ring. So essentially Skar, unlike the other classes, actually has the ability to swap between its element. So to defeat him, you must use the opposite element. You can see there that the player has swapped to the water element to attack Skar. Now they've swapped to fire to attack the plant enemies that he has summoned. Now that the Skar has turned to water, he is using plant attacks. So Skar has the ability to reuse attacks from earlier bosses, shoot all sorts of projectiles, and summon enemies of different types, really throwing everything that the player has faced throughout the game all at once. You can see there that they ran into a bomber enemy and took a fair amount of damage. We're collecting potions to fuel it. Skar also has that terrifying bite attack if they get too close. This large maw that chomps down. But nonetheless, he was defeated. Now that they're defeated and reduced to this small, weakened state, Skar desperately tries to convince the protagonist, Mugusa, to share his powers and join him in the dark arcane. So the player can actually choose here whether they want to join him or leave. This player has chosen to leave Skar, let him rot at the top of his tower in a weakened state, and bring peace to the world. Thanks for watching.